Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It's not Sunday morning, but Monday morning. You'll have to forgive me. I took a day off. I needed one. It was Father's Day. I'm a father, so I took the day off. Had a bunch of family over. Spent a bunch of time in the garden. Spent a bunch of time barbecuing, smoking some ribs. It was pretty great. I hope each and every one of you had a relaxing day yesterday, whether or not you involved a father figure or whatever. I know I did. So it's Monday morning Tinkle Tunes today. Wanted to bring out an artist to share with all of you that surprisingly a lot of people, and maybe you included, are not aware that this artist really exists for obvious reasons. And that's unfair. That shouldn't happen because he is incredibly talented and had a lot to offer the musical world and everyone that loves things of a softer sound and ambient nature. Talking about his mega famous brother, Brian Eno. No one can, there's a lot that can be said about the man's career. Well, he had a brother named Roger, and Roger was equally as talented in my eyes. And I've mentioned before in my videos, he never kind of rode the coattails of his brother's, real kind of monster fame. Always continued to take his, forge his own path and take his own kind of unique twist on the music that he was putting out, and it never was like a reflection of what Brian was doing. Brian was always doing stuff that was far more kind of, I'd say kind of spaced out in his head, environmental type of stuff that was intended to be used and infused with like art installations. That's where Brian really got a majority of his inspiration was from large art installations all throughout the late 70s, when art was getting, the art culture was getting really hip and really cool, and really he had injected himself into the scene in New York City and was really heavily involved in that and wanted to, do his music kind of in tandem with these visual art displays and other types of things. And so that was really his, his style, wherein his brother Roger was far more of a classically trained and classically inspired player, whom I love and adore just as much. And so I wanted to bring out some of his selections and share them with you today. A lot of you ambient folks maybe not even aware. So yeah, again, talking about Roger, this is an album called Voices. I believe about mid-80s, probably 1986, something like that, 1985. This is a beautiful selection that really highlights a lot of his talents in the classical acoustical piano stylings. His stuff is always just kind of like really heavily incorporated with also lots of chamber music, if you know what I mean. Like, so he involves small selections of strings, usually just like a cello, maybe two, violin, viola, that type of thing. And that is all kind of like, mingling with these little piano themes that he, these genius little piano themes that he creates and writes. And this album really kind of like, every piece kind of like smoothly transitions into the next, and it's in a sense kind of like an overall kind of conceptual design. This one kind of being kind of more of kind of like the new age sound that he was never really like kind of involved with, but everything always had kind of more of a classical sense. But there's some moments in here you can tell that he's kind of trying to like, you know, involve himself a little bit in that kind of new age scene. But this is a really fantastic selection for anyone that if you want to kind of like bridge the gap between how much you love Brian, you know, this would be something that can really like bridge that gap. It's kind of reminiscent of what Brian Eno was doing with Harold Budd in the early '80s, like with the Pearl album and a lot of that other stuff. So really fantastic. So check this one out. And another one that I wanted to bring out, another one of his albums, a little bit later in his, not his career, but just a little bit later in the '80s. And so it kind of has that flair of being a little more experimental, kind of darker. This one's called Between Tides. Again, this one I feel was kind of more intended to, maybe he was writing it with the intent of hopefully selling it to a production company so that it could be used as film music. That's the way it feels to me. And it's much darker, much more thematic as far as like the instrumentations that you're hearing make all sorts of like kind of recapitulations and make some like reoccurrences throughout the whole album. And like I said, it just kind of has more of kind of a real darker, mustier kind of, you know, flavor to it. But yeah, another one of his selections that's just, you know, undeniable. He's definitely, you know, a giant of ambient music and you know, contemporary classical that he stands on his own and doesn't need anyone else to hold him up. Yeah, it really speaks for itself, speaks volumes. So anyone that is, you know, interested in getting into some Roger, you know, this is definitely also another great pick that I can recommend. You know, these LPs, they're not expensive. They're, you know, not of the, you know, super hip, you know, variety of Brian Eno stuff where it's, you know, you're going to be paying $40, $50, $60 for used copies of Brian Eno's records. Not the case with these. You can get them for $10, $15. So yeah, it's fun to look into, fun to listen to. And like I said, more along the lines of the contemporary classical sense than more of the kind of electronic ambient new age sound. So yeah, that's that. And another one of his that I have that I really wanted to bring out too, I only have it on the CD format. It was only ever released on the CD format. It wasn't released on vinyl. From the 90s, I believe, early to mid 90s, or later 90s, 98. This one is just gorgeous. It's called Flatlands. I don't know if this was in film, if it was part of a production, some film music, but boy, it really, it's kind of short and sweet. Each of these selections are only like maybe 1.5 to 2 minutes long, primarily piano, but there's lots of extra instrumentations, especially viola. There's lots of really beautiful deep viola on this. It's very haunting. The themes are very haunting. It reminds me a lot of the real kind of like mellow kind of Celtic Scandinavian style folk music that you hear infused with American folk coming out of places like in the Middle America, North, you know, places like Minnesota and Michigan and stuff like that. I really got a lot of vibes from, if anyone's familiar with the film music from Fargo. If you've ever listened to that music, of course everyone's seen the film is, you know, monumental. This was right around the same time, ironically, I think late 90s, right? But this really, like, it reminds me a lot of that, the music from that movie. I remember the music, I just love the music, just that real kind of stark, snowy landscape of just kind of like almost the Midwestern desert, you know, that is the the northern Great Plains, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, that area of the world. It's just it's a different place altogether, and that's the kind of music and the vibe that you hear and you get. It's just that like kind of that solitude of that lone viola and the piano, and just kind of this one has a little bit more of kind of I think there's some synthesizer drone sounds on this, so it kind of gives you a real, like I said, real atmospheric drony kind of vibe. But yeah, Flatlands by Roger, magnificent, and what I was saying before about his records not being like super hyper popular, they're affordable. Those LPs you can get it for $10. Same with the CD, you can get it for under $10, and you might even be able to find it in a bargain bin store somewhere in your local town. So yeah, I had to get online to find these selections because they're just not around. They're not hyper popular. So it's worth having, worth checking out. He's really a masterful artist, and should definitely be up there, in the bright spotlights with the people that he was involving himself with all throughout the 70s and 80s. His brother, and Daniel Lanois and Harold Budd, and all those cats that kind of created that whole genre and that whole scene. So yeah, wanted to highlight him this morning, and thanks again everybody for coming around and joining me on these quiet mornings. I'm shipping the kids off for a week. They're gonna go to their Nana's house in Southern Oregon. So I'm gonna be a free daddy for just about a week. I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself. I still have to work, but I see my toes in the river here in the next few days. I think it's gonna happen. We're approaching some 90-degree days here in Oregon now, so it's gonna be great. I love each and every single one of you, and I hope you have a fantastic week. Thanks again for joining me here on the Monday morning Tinkle Tunes. This is Aaron Major from Springfield, Oregon, signing off.